just seen a lot of things. I've seen what works, I've seen what doesn't. I've seen what it really takes to scale a business in a way that makes it as attractive as possible for an exit and selling. This is the first podcast in what will be a series at the beginning that's very targeted to helping you understand what has to be true in order to maximize your own business exit. Well, hello there. I'm Jonathan Brown. My friends call me JB. And if you're listening to this, I'd like to consider you a friend. So please call me JB. I run a company called White Buffalo Advisors. And what I do is I help business owners get top of market, unicorn, best possible exits for their business. And in the course of doing that, I touch on a lot of other aspects of business in terms of coaching and consulting and deal making that put me in a unique position to just having had a lot of at-bats. I've just seen a lot of things. I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't. I've seen what it really takes to scale a business in a way that makes it as attractive as possible for an exit and selling. And so this is the first podcast in what will be a series at the beginning that's very targeted to helping you understand what has to be true in order to maximize your own business exit. And then eventually we'll delve into more general topics around business exits, acquisitions, and everything that comes in between those things. This is meant to be a very informal, almost conversational type of interaction for you and I to have, where I'm just going to be very direct and share what I've seen that works and what doesn't work. So before I get into some of that, I have to start with why. Simon Sinek is a favorite author of mine, and he has the book Start With Why. So I'm going to share my why with you. Why am I doing this? I am possibly the most unlikely of public figures and gurus. I don't even like the word guru, and I never at any point in my life have woken up and said to myself, man, I really want to be famous on social media and in general. I'm a very private guy. I'm just a guy who has a beautiful family. I have 3 wonderful kids. I've been married to my wife now. We've been together for 24 years. And I'm not a particularly flashy person, but I've done some pretty incredible things. I've been very blessed in my career to work on some unbelievable projects, some unbelievable exits, both personally and even more so with the clients that I've worked with. And as I like to joke, I've sort of Forrest Gumped my way into being key part of some really interesting things that have happened in business over the years. So that gives me a perspective that is a little bit unusual. And so I would have been completely comfortable just continuing to go about my business and work with the clients that I have and raise my babies. And you know, if I'm not doing business, I'm usually coaching them in something. I'm sort of probably the highest paid volunteer softball, baseball, football, whatever coach that there is. And so most of my time when I'm home is spent with them doing that. And then, I'm working with clients and flying all over the place, just trying to help them to achieve their dreams. Well, I was having a conversation. This is over a year ago now. So this podcast has been building over time. And about, 14 months ago, I'll say, I was having this conversation with a very well-known friend, and I was bitching. I was bitching about some of the conversations that I was having with business owners who had seen someone else. It wasn't any one particular person. There were a few different ones. And the beliefs that they had about what it was going to take to sell their business and what they could expect and what that process would look like based upon what they had heard were wrong. And not only were they wrong, were incomplete. I'll be generous, incomplete. They were dangerously wrong and incomplete. There were some very important things that they didn't understand. And that was leading to some unrealistic expectations. about how easy it is to exit a business and what the business would likely sell for. And so as I'm grousing and complaining about this, my friend says, well, JB, well, that's your fault. I was like, what the hell do you mean it's my fault? I'm not the one giving that information out. I would never tell people whatever the thing was. And he said, it's your fault because you are so comfortable being anonymous and being this sort of shadowy figure behind the scenes that a lot of people will call privately and work with, but you never go out publicly and talk about the right way to do things and what your experiences are. And by you not doing that, you are directly creating an environment where other folks can go out there and say things that aren't helpful. And that's your fault. So I thought about that in the moment, it kind of pissed me off. And then the more I thought about it and prayed about it and just considered it, wrestled with it, the more I realized he was right. I didn't like that, but he was right. And so did what I always do with a big decision. I talked to dozens of people who I just admire and respect, many of whom have huge podcasts and huge audiences, just to understand what all goes into this and what is necessary. I don't have the ability to bullshit you. I don't have the ability or the desire to create outward signs that I live a life that I don't. So you're not going to see me driving around in a Lamborghini. I'll be candid. I could buy one, but I would feel inauthentic. It's not who I am. I drive a 1-year-old Suburban. It's a nice Suburban. It's like the second level down from the highest trim. But when my kids dump all their baseball and softball and sporting equipment in there and dump Georgia clay all over it because we live in Georgia, I don't care. Doesn't bother me. If somebody runs a cart into it, doesn't bother me. I live in a normal house in Georgia. It's a big house, but it's just a normal house. I'm just a regular guy. That's how I grew up, and that's the life that I want to live. I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in a whole lot of sort of status symbols to show you that I'm successful, because the reality is my track record speaks for itself. And I'm going to tell you a secret. The overwhelming majority of people that I have worked with in exits or in deals, some of whom are pretty big celebrities, in their personal life, what you see is not who they are. They're just normal people for the most part. And generally, the folks who have made the largest financial exits or who have built the largest net worths, you have no idea who they are and you've never heard of them, and they would be the least flashy person in the room. So that's lesson number one. Now let's get in a little bit to exits and a business exit and sort of what all goes into that. And in this first episode, I'm going to talk very generally, and then I'll get deeper into some of the specifics in future episodes here. But first, we have to start with why again. Why do people want to exit their business in the first place? Well, there's a number of reasons. Some are excellent reasons to exit. Some are not as good because they put you in a defensive position and they limit your negotiating power. But let's talk about some of them. So most commonly is the owner feels like they have gotten to the business to whatever point that they can, and they're limited in terms of how much additionally they can grow that business. They've reached the Peter principle. They've reached sort of the end of their ability to functionally make that business better. It's at stasis. And then when that happens, inevitably, there's always this sort of angst for a while. And then they realize, I was the right person to get the business from wherever it was. If it was a startup, it was nothing, or maybe they bought it and then they optimized it and they grew it to a certain degree. They were the right person for that job. But looking into the future, maybe it's doubling, tripling, quadrupling, whatever that is, they realize that they're not the right person to get it from where it is to where it needs to go. That's a good reason to exit a business. It's a great reason to exit a business. Another is there's personal things that happen to people. Sadly, there's divorce, and divorce can create a very murky situation when the husband and wife are both owners of the business. And then you have this sort of dissolution of assets that needs to take place. Partnership issues, partnership disputes, where you have two or more partners that initially got along great, but as the business grows and the success increases, sometimes people change, and sometimes their motivations change, their own life situations change, and the alignment that was there before between partners is no longer there. Sometimes it's just jealousy between partners that happens, where everyone feels like they are more responsible for success than the other person. And so when that happens, it's kind of another type of divorce, where it's no longer tenable for those partners to continue to operate that business together in a productive way. So partnership issues are another reason that businesses need to transition to a new owner. Market conditions. Sometimes we just lose our vigor a little bit. We lose our will. We lose our desire. We lose our hunger. And we burn out. And it's just time, based upon market conditions, the conditions within the business itself, for someone else to take the reins and to move the ball forward, so to speak. Financial planning reasons. Especially this is true with owners who are older, and they may be looking at the beginning stages of what retirement looks like for them. And if they've succession planned really well, that tends to be an easier transition. Sometimes even they'll sell the business to an existing employee or group of employees. It's called an ESOP. But more often than not, that there wasn't succession planning, or the succession plan was, oh, my kids will take over the business one day. Well, depending on the nature of the business and the personality of the child, adult child, that may not be as viable as you thought it did when they were in diapers. So Tommy and Susie may not be interested in running dad's $15 million plumbing company because they want to talk about artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency over pomegranate martinis at the bar. And that's okay. Self-awareness comes into play there. And you realize, oh, maybe they're not going to take over this business. So now what do I do? Because I don't want to run forever. I'm old, or at least I feel old, and I'm ready to do the next thing. So succession planning and folks that are a little bit more advanced in age and they're just ready to move on is another reason. Issues with the overall economy. And we're going through a little bit of that right now. And depending on who you talk to, there are some folks who would tell you the economy's booming, and there are others that would tell you that we're seeing some very serious signs of a pullback and a contraction. And depending upon the industry that you're in and the people that you serve as your customer base, you could be more or less impacted by that. So e-commerce is a really great example. I deal with a fair number of e-commerce businesses who are, in that probably $15 to $100 million revenue range. And it's been a wild ride this last 4 years because that industry grew in 2 years during the whole COVID situation. The amount that it should have grown in 10 to 12 years. It was just explosive because what was everybody doing? We were sitting home trying to figure out how to deal with boredom and loneliness and neuroticism. Because we really weren't meant to be isolated in that way. And we were just buying stuff online. It didn't really matter. Didn't matter what it was. We wanted it. Give me that. Give me that. So e-commerce just went through the roof. Well, when we returned to normal, you saw what I believe was a predictable return to baseline. It didn't return to where it was before, but it did return to a new baseline. And so a lot of these e-commerce companies, their revenues were negatively impacted. And so you add to that there was a frenzy to buy up those companies for a little while because their performance was so incredible. And some of the buyers who were acquiring those companies bought them in a way that was very risky, and it did not have a high chance of sustained success if there was any change at all in the trajectory of these companies' financial, but of course there was. And so now there's just not as many buyers in that space, and the buyers who remain are very, very choosy. And so the multiples went down. But still, there are a number of folks who just want to cash out, and they're just sort of tired of that grind because of the industry things that are happening there with ad costs going up, supply chain being more challenging. It's a little bit more difficult to get good, solid vendors to do the things that you need done in that business. So there are a lot of reasons why someone would want to exit their business or sell their business. Now, a quick note, because I am personally notorious, and in one of my programs is actually called the double exit formula. And exit to me does not always mean the same thing as it does to everybody else. An exit can mean what we're talking about here in the traditional definition and context, which is to sell your business to somebody else and to move on. But there's another kind of exit that's actually more important, and that's exiting you, the owner, from being necessary or relevant in your business. That's exit number one. And that exit is more important than the second exit, because the second exit of selling it for maximum value is actually directly dependent upon how well you achieve the first exit, which is making sure that you are not overly relevant in the day-to-day operations of your business. And there's an incredibly scientific, data-driven test that I like to perform when I'm talking to owners to determine if they, yes or no, have achieved that first exit. And let me unpack that for you. Make sure you get a pen and a paper because it's complex. If you leave your business for 2 months and you don't return any calls, emails, or anything else, does it still exist when you return? Is it thriving, or is it a train wreck? Pretty scientific, right? Joking aside, that's really it. You should be able to do that. It's not ideal, but you should be able to do that. And you should be able to unplug from your business for a period of time and have it do just fine. If you can't do that, you have not completed the first exit and you have some work to do. And that's awesome. Why? Because anytime we can define the problem, we can fix the problem. So first exit, and one of the things that I'll get into in future episodes, it's an enormous value driver, is how crucially important the founder, CEO, owner is to the daily vitality of the business itself. The higher the importance of the owner, the lower the multiple, or at the very least, the cash amount multiple that's going to be conveyed to the owner at the end of the transaction. So what does that normally look like? If you have an owner that is really important to the business, maybe they're the chief business development officer in function, or they're so operationally involved that it would be difficult if they just disappeared for the business to continue doing well. Well, it doesn't mean that the business won't sell. What it means is that the business is not going to sell for a maximum multiple and a lot of cash up front. Why? Well, we have to always put ourselves in the shoes of the buyer. And if you're buying a business and the owner is essentially the star employee, even though they're the owner, when they come over in the transition and they have to stay for a fixed period of time, they're the star employee. Well, the last thing that you want to do as a business owner is to give your star employee a gigantic amount of life-changing money. Because essentially, what have you just done? You have totally demotivated that person to continue operating with the intensity and the consistency that they were before. Because it's sort of like, hey, I'm paid. I don't know what you guys want to do, but I got my money. It's human nature. So in order to protect themselves, what the buyer will do is they'll structure the compensation to the owner over time. And so you don't get that huge chunk of money up front. You get it over, usually 3 to 5 years, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. The issue for you as a seller is that often there are some performance benchmarks that are attached to that, and things can happen that are beyond your control. And the next thing you know, the vanity number that you were so proud to tell all of your friends that you exited for ends up being significantly less. The actual cash you end up getting from the deal is significantly less. I see this happen all the time, and I'll share some specific examples in later episodes. But there's some important nuances that go into how and when to make the decision to exit. And in order to maximize the full amount of money that you get in exiting your business, there are some tried and true steps that you need to go through and some boxes that must be checked in order for that to be true. So how do we get what that number is? One, it depends on the industry. Every industry has a range of multiples that buyers will pay. There's another stratification that's important to note, which is that different buyers pay different amounts. And So a private equity firm, or maybe a family office, or some other savvy, sophisticated institutional type buyer, generally is going to pay a higher multiple than a competitor. Not always, but generally a competitor, especially when you're dealing with anything that's sub $5 million, maybe even sub 10, depending on the industry. They're always going to pay more. The multiples will be higher because they benefit from economy of scale. And by plugging your $10 million business into their $300 million machine, they eventually have a mind to flip that entire thing. When they sell that book of business, the multiple that they get will be drastically more than what they paid you. So even if they pay you a 6 multiple of EBITDA, and don't worry if you don't know what EBITDA is, we're going to get into that later in detail. But generally, you're going to get a multiple of your audited EBITDA. Well, if they pay you 6 and they go through their rigorous process of value creation, which is what they do from the moment they acquire you to the moment that they eventually exit either your individual asset or the entire portfolio of assets that they put together, there's a whole in-depth process of value creation that they're going to go through. They have some cool tips and tricks that you don't necessarily have access to. By the way, in later episodes, I'm going to tell you what those tricks are so you can do some of them yourself. But if they pay you the 6, but they're going to exit a $300 million portfolio, they're not getting paid a 6. They're going to get paid 10 plus, probably significantly more than that. So there's an arbitrage play between what they pay you and what they exit at before they do anything else, just because of the sheer size. So private equity is generally going to pay the most. Then you start going down in multiple to competitors, employees, and then random folks off the street who just want to buy your business because they like your industry and they've decided they want to do it. The majority of folks who are doing that today, who are just kind of individual people that are acquiring businesses, are something called search funders, which is a relatively new phenomenon, but you're starting to see it happen quite a bit. And a search funder is just simply someone that is an individual like myself or like you who decides that they want to buy an HVAC company or a manufacturing company or a marketing agency, whatever that is. And they come up with a business thesis. They come up with what's called a buy box, which is sort of the general characteristics of the business that they want to acquire. And then from there, they go out and they pitch their idea to investors, usually starting with family and friends. Sometimes they get into institutional money, but mostly it's high net worth family and friends who will invest in their search fund. And in exchange for investing in that search fund, they get a piece of the future profits of the company. And sometimes it's structured as a loan. Sometimes it's structured as more of an equity type stake. So there's search funders. Search funders are generally going to pay less than a private equity firm, but still not bad. And then you kind of go down the line. Well, in order for, let's say that you're in the marketing agency space, or just any agency really, marketing, advertising, PR, they pretty much have the same multiples. Well, first you have to figure out what is the multiple range. And let's say that it's anywhere from 4 to 8 times EBITDA. Well, that's true at businesses that are valued up to a certain point, and it's different for businesses that are valued at a greater point. So there's an enormous difference in valuation between a company that's doing less than $5 million in revenue and a company that's doing, say, $5 to $15 million in revenue. And then an additional difference when you get above $15 million in revenue. So we have two things happening at once. We have value that's being attributed to the industry that you're in. We also have value that's being attributed to the size of your business. How much revenue are you doing? And then once you have those two things pretty much locked in, you can get a pretty decent feel for what the range is. And let's say that range is anywhere from 4 to 8 times. Well, you have zero control over what the range is for your industry. You can't control that. That's a gigantic aircraft carrier that moves very, very slowly. The multiples do change based upon what's happening in the macro market and the economy, but you don't have the ability to change that. And it takes time for those things to happen. Remember when I was talking earlier about e-commerce, something massive, catastrophic, and unusual had to happen for the multiples for e-commerce to spike the way that they did during COVID. And then simultaneously, the pullback to where they are now. Those are gigantic market events that you have absolutely no control over. So what can you control? You can control, if it's 4 to 8, you can control where your business falls on that 4 to 8 range. So obviously there's a huge difference between selling your business at 4 times EBITDA versus 8 times EBITDA. So what we can control is, what do we do to check every single box possible to ensure that our business sells closer to that $8 million range, or eight time multiple range, than the 4 times multiple range? That just becomes exit preparation. And there are a number of boxes that have to be checked. And we will get into the specifics of what some of those important ones are and how to get them done over time. But just big picture, predictability. And predictability meaning when a potential buyer looks at your business and they read your financials and they read what your business is, who you're selling to, how you go about delivering that product or service, they want to know, how likely is it that this business will continue to perform at least at par with where it is now if we acquire it, and what is the potential growth upside for this business, and what confidence score do I as a buyer attach to that? So the more confidence and the more data points we can give to show this is a really well-run business. We've designed it with thought and intention. We have all of our processes really well documented. We're giving tremendous visibility into the integrity of our financials. The financials themselves are tight. We're not running by the seat of our pants. The taxes, that's a word a lot of you just immediately turned off this podcast as soon as you heard that word. But the annual taxes for the business match what we're showing on our P&L, and they match what we're telling the potential buyer our revenue is. Because if those two things don't match, we have a problem. And let me pause there for a moment. What do you mean, JB? Well, there are a lot of businesses where the owner will play, let's say, some games when it comes to, not legally, I'm talking about the folks who are sort of cheating on their taxes. That's not what I'm talking about. Those folks generally get found out very quickly and those businesses never sell. But there are a lot of legitimate things that you can do to show less profit in your business. Decisions that you might make as an owner that somebody who was a financial investor and financially driven would not make. And so you do that with an eye towards mitigating that sort of final net income number, adjusted income, upon which your taxes will be calculated. Well, while you're running a business and have no intention of selling it in probably the next 3 years, that's fine. Here's the problem. I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen who have millions of dollars that they are creatively structuring to avoid taxes and removing from profit. The problem with that is you can't simultaneously out of one side of your mouth say, well, our profit is X and we want you to give us a multiple based on X, while having your taxes show this. That doesn't work because no one's going to take your word for it. No one cares. If you can't prove it, it's not real. So one of the things that folks often find themselves having to do when they begin to think about an exit in the future is realize, okay, it's time to pay the piper. I'm going to have to start showing all of the true income and profit that we're making, even though we're going to pay whatever percentage tax bracket we're at on that income. It's okay because it's going to pale in comparison to the multiple on that same income that you're going to get later. Okay. So income taxes and how much profit you're showing as a business is one of the biggest things that folks tend to realize they have a problem when they start looking at the potential for an exit. So let me touch on a few misconceptions. All right. Misconceptions that I hear often when folks look to sell their business. One, your business is your business, and be very careful comparing it to what somebody else got for their business. One, were they in the same industry? Two, were they at the same size that you are? Three, was the number that you heard or that they gave you real, or was it complete and utter bullshit? Because it's really easy to create an exit number that's not real. Well, how, JB? Go and look up press releases of acquisitions or exits and find one that shows Acme Widget Company was acquired by Black Tree PE for $300 million. Well, $300 million is a vanity number because it's very unlikely to be real. I have one particular example that I'm thinking where a friend of mine exited. I'm not going to tell you what the industry was, but he exited for, on paper, what was $150 million. Well, after performance benchmarks that were sneaky and unrealistic and all sorts of other clauses, earnouts, all sorts of different structures that were really designed to mitigate the amount of money that this PE that bought them actually paid, he ended up with $1 million. I'm going to run that back for you. $150 million public exit. He ended up with $1 million. He was making more than that per year already. This is a terrible deal, and they happen all the time. So if you're comparing your business, if you're in his space and you're like, well, Bobby got a $150 million exit. That's what I want. Bobby did not get a $150 million exit. Bobby walked away with $1 million after 2 years of litigation. So be very cautious in what you're comparing your exit to. You really want to understand what the market is paying in your space at your size for roughly your type of company. And you want as many data points as you can to give you a real feel for what your exit is likely to look like. And then that also will begin to give you a punch list of things that you need to get done, because you can compare yourself and say, all right, right now, I'm probably worth 4 times what my business EBITDA is. So in order to get to 8, here are the 6 things that I need to get done. And here's how long it's probably going to take me to do that. We need to clean up our SOPs because we don't really have a good, solid, documented set of SOPs. We have some turnover in our employee ranks, and we may have some flight risks as well. So we need to shore those up. We may have some business structure issues, some tax structure issues, some supply chain issues. Our ad spend may have accidentally gotten a little out of control and we didn't realize it. We need to dig down into why that's happening. Essentially, you want to try to make any process in your business as close to idiot-proof as you can, so that if you removed the person who was responsible for it and stuck somebody else into it, it would be almost impossible for them to screw it up. Any competent person would be able to jump in and at least have enough information as to how things have historically been done and why, that they themselves could step in and figure it out and just move forward from that. So another misconception that I see is that once an exit happens, you're done, you're on the golf course, and life is perfect. Very rarely is that what actually happens. And this starts to venture into the emotional side of exit preparation. And don't underestimate the importance of this, because if you've been grinding along and you have been investing your time, your energy, your emotion into this business, in many ways, for a lot of us, it becomes a child, becomes your baby. And it is very closely tied to your identity, who you are even. That's not healthy. And many of us eventually get to the point where we learn to stop doing that. But reality is reality, and human nature is human nature. And all of us who are entrepreneurs, we're a little different. We're just a different kind of person. And so we so closely anchor our identity with the business itself that when the business sells and we no longer have that thing to go to every day, that thing that we are responsible for, some really weird things can start to happen. And you can feel untethered, a bit like a boat that somebody cut the line to the dock and it's just sort of floating aimlessly in the bay. And then you see this predictable sort of evolution of emotion with someone that just exited, especially if they've never done it before. And it's really, it manifests itself in different ways. The words that people will use are different. They can sound just like, I don't feel the way that I thought I was going to feel, and I can't quite put my finger on it. Or something's off, JB, and I don't exactly know what it is. I thought I'd be happier. I thought that I would go spend more time with my wife and my kids, or in retirement, or doing things that I'm passionate about, or I really was excited about golfing or going fishing more or traveling. And I did those things, but they didn't bring me the fulfillment and the joy that I thought, or they did, but I'm over it and I'm bored. And then sometimes the darker side comes out where it's just sort of like, I have all this money, everything that I always thought that I wanted, but I've never felt more empty. And that's a crisis. It's an emotional crisis that they don't know what to do with. What I call that is entrepreneurial depression. It's exit founder depression. And it's pretty predictable that it's going to happen. So there are some things that you have to do to mentally prepare yourself before your exit for finding something else. It doesn't have to be anything related to what you're doing, but you do have to find something else that's going to give you purpose. Because the thing that was giving you purpose to get up out of bed every morning is now gone, or no longer your exclusive responsibility. And it's very difficult to go from having that anchor to no anchor. With the type of personality that many of us have, it's a little bit like a hammer with no nails. What are you going to do if you're a hammer with no nails? You're going to start finding nails. You're going to make maybe decisions that are not the greatest decisions for you. So misconception is that it's sunshine, rainbows, and puppies when you sell. Now, not to say that it's not wonderful when people sell. It is. It's life-changing and hopefully changes your financial future, your family's tree, whatever that is. But there's some really important work that has to be put in before. And and the final thing that I'll talk about in this video is another misconception is that folks don't think it's that important to have a good, sound financial and tax plan for the exit. And whew, boy, is it. Because capital gains are real. And chances are, if you're running a business that's sub $100 million in revenue, you're probably only paying yourself $250,000 to $400,000 a year in actual salary. That's probably what you're making. Sometimes less, maybe more if you're doing some other things. And we're not talking about owner's discretionary benefits and things like that. That's tangential. But in terms of actual salary, that's what you're paying yourself. And you're probably busy enough that you're not living this crazy, extravagant life for the most part. Well, even after taxes, which are going to hurt, but you can mitigate some of that. And that's part of the plan that you have to put into place. But even after that, when you suddenly find yourself no longer having this regular salary that's coming in, but you do have a gigantic chunk of money, it's really important that you know what you're going to do with it and how long that money needs to last you, and that you don't make any significant and drastic changes to your daily life, because that's when people get in trouble, is when they start to change drastically their spending habits or their consumption. And most of the time, hyper-consumption suddenly after an exit is really a result of what I just talked about a minute ago, which is you no longer have purpose. So what do we do as human beings when we don't feel comfortable, we don't feel right, and we don't have something that's fulfilling to us? We say, oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. I don't have the right toys. I'm not going to the right places. I'm not hanging out with the right people. Wrong tool for the wrong project. But it's very common for that to happen. So not taking the time to have a really good, solid financial plan is another sort of common misconception / mistake that I see people run into. So I think that's enough for now. And this was meant to be just very much an informal conversation between really you and I. It's admittedly one way, but I'm imagining that you're here, about someone who's in position to have seen billions of exits when you aggregate them, and different types of businesses, and worked with a lot of founders and have been a founder who's exited, and what the real shit is that happens. So in the next few episodes, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a little bit more into the weeds of, practically speaking, what types of things do you need to do to prepare to exit your business if you want to do it by yourself and you don't want to bring in, an M&A advisor or an exit planner, and you just want to sort of try it on your own. You can do that. There's just some things that you have to get right and some things that you need to know. So in future episodes, I'm going to get into those things, and my stated goal and intention is for my free content that I'm just giving you to be better than anything that you're going to pay for from anybody else. Why am I going to do that? Here's the reality. Some of you are going to look at that content and say, this is amazing. I'm going to go and take it, and I'm going to have this great exit, and I'm going to maybe shoot JB an email or a message and say, hey man, thank you so much for the info that you shared. Man, that's awesome. That will make me very happy. A few of you are going to say, that's a lot of information. The information itself is not enough. What I need is someone to help me with it, to help me actually implement it, and to hold me accountable for doing these things. I'd like to work with JB. That's the entire motivation for this. Nothing hidden, no agenda. So thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you next time.